Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Baal Teshuva show with Pesach Charney. And I'm here as usual also with Nisim Lazari. And we're on J-Root Radio, as well as you can hear this on the phone on Monday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. You can also hear it on jrootradio.com, J-R-O-O-T radio.com. I'm honored to have today as my guest Dean Henry Abramson, Jewish name Hillel, who's a dean at Touro College, and he has a very compelling and interesting Baal Teshuva story, and also a very interesting website which includes a lot of fascinating information on Jewish history from many different regions of the world, for many different periods. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. Dean Abramson, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and how you developed your interest and passion for Yiddishkeit and Jewish history?
Oh, Mr. Charney, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and Rabbi Lazari, it's wonderful to be here. I hope that this won't be too tedious for your listeners, but, you know, professors, when you give us a chance to talk, we can just suck all the oxygen out of the room as we're going through the story, especially when we're talking about ourselves. But I'll try and make it brief. I was born in a rather unusual part of the world, a small town in northern Ontario, Canada, called Ansonville, Ontario. We were the only Jewish family there, and many people often interrupt me at this point and say, well, how did you get up there? And so the short sidebar here is that my grandfather, Alav Shalom, was living in Russia at the time, at the turn of the 20th century, and there was a war with Japan that he did not want to participate in.
This was your father's father?
My father's father. Despite the fact that the battleground was very close to authentic Chinese food, he didn't want to go out that far east, and he ended up, there was some land grants for farmers from the Lithuanian region, so he took advantage of one of those grants. He went up to northern Ontario. He farmed for about 5 years. It was incredibly difficult work. He wasn't especially good at it, so he moved to a small town there that had built up around paper mill industry, and established a store, which was something that my father, who was the youngest of his 7 children, took over after him, and that's how I ended up in northern Ontario. So we were the only Jewish family there, and so it was a rather unusual kind of upbringing Jewishly. My parents are not observant, but are very, very traditional and extremely respectful of the Judaic tradition. Mm-hmm. In fact, in many ways, the kind of sacrifices that they endured for my Jewish education are far beyond what most FFBs would engage in even today. When I reached the age of 10, my parents felt that I really had to have some kind of Jewish education for a bar mitzvah. So my father sold half the business. He took in a partner. Wow. And they took an apartment in Toronto, which is about 500 miles south of where we lived.
That's a long distance.
You know?
Wow.
And my father would commute every 2 weeks. I lived with my mother, and my father would come up with us for 2 weeks and then go back for 2 weeks. And they did this for 4 years so that I could go to a Talmud Torah in the afternoon and learn a little bit about Yiddishkeit. I had my bar mitzvah, and then I went back up there. So I had very warm feelings about Yiddishkeit basically from the teachers I had there. In particular, I'll call out Rabbi Yakubovitz from H. Chaim School in Toronto, who, I don't remember very much about those days. I barely remember learning a line of Chumash, but I do remember the stories, the midrashim, the way he made the biblical characters come alive. It made a big impression on my neshama at a very young age. And although I didn't stick with any kind of level of observance, I was really, on a very deep, profound personal level, I identified with the midrashim that he would teach to us. Is this taking too long?
No, it's fascinating.
Okay. All right, so then you said the wrong thing. Now we can talk a long time. So then I ended up moving back up to Iroquois Falls, to Ansonville. They had changed the name, actually, in the meantime. It was considered too small to have its own name, so they joined it to a nearby town.
So you moved back at what age?
14.
Oh, after, right.
What you're talking about? What period? I'm talking about the 1920s, the 1930s, or what?
Not quite. I have a lot of white in my beard. Not quite that old.
Yeah,
this will be. I was born in '63, so I guess this will be the mid '70s, mid to late '70s. I went back up there, and actually, I had kind of a rude awakening because, when I lived up there until I was 10, I had lots of friends. None of them were Jewish, of course, but I played with the English Protestant kids. I played with the French Catholic kids. Perfectly bilingual. We just played in the streets. We played baseball till we couldn't see the ball anymore, and they were all my friends.
They were friendly?
Of course.
And the age of no TV. Age of no TV and no cell phone.
Well, I think we had a TV, but only had two channels. And one was in French, and they were both in black and white.
Not only, but most of the houses it wasn't TV. Yeah. So kids, I remember myself, kids was in the street playing together.
Oh yeah, and it was it was like a shtetl upbringing because I would go wandering in the woods and I would go catch frogs and I would do all kinds of outdoor things that I wouldn't let my kids do now in the 5 towns. A little too scary.
I'm really, sorry that my kids don't experience this experiment. I tell you the truth, this is something that I know that the mother used to call, it's time to sleep, it's dark and nobody want to come. But today just the mother said, the TV program, turn off and that's it, finish, not the electronic babysitter.
Yeah.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism outside of your circle of friends?
So here's what happened. When I came back after being gone for 4 years, I thought I would just connect again with all my friends that I played with all the time. But I had a rude awakening because so many of them had, in that space of time, absorbed absurd anti-Semitic ideas. And, they'd never met any other Jews besides me and my parents. But, all of a sudden there were people literally asking to see my horns. And they would either call me dirty Jew or in French, maudit juif, which means cursed Jew. And I got into a lot of fights. I was a terrible student at that time. And ultimately, I got a rude awakening about the realities of Jewish existence in the modern world. To jump the story a little forward from there, I was always therefore fascinated with Jewish identity.
May I ask you a quick question related to that? When you were in Toronto, did you experience anti-Semitism in the time that you were there?
Nothing significant that I can remember.
Okay.
There was a reason to ask you about the timing of this. That's because you just mentioned this is the after 73 war, and basically this is the awakening of when the Arabs leaders decided to work on the PR, anti-Semitic, and I know that the BBC survey and all these people are just starting to plant the seed of anti-Semitism in the general population that wasn't aware about nothing about Israel become like the evil and the strong evil and about that. That's what the time. That's why I'm asking about.
That's certainly
because that's the kids in the streets see in the TV all this kind of propaganda against Israeli and they start to observe it, and that's now it's almost irreversible.
I think that would make a lot of sense if you're looking at an urbanized environment with an educated population. But this is a tiny little town in northern Ontario where most of the people, they quit school at 16, they go to work in the paper mill, they had very little TV as well. What I can tell you about the level of anti-Semitism, I remember being in the store, for example, with my father, Alav Shalom, and the trappers would come in. These are guys who would live in the woods, and they would trap beaver and bear and things like that, and they would sell the hides. It was really the Wild West. And they would come in and they would argue with my father about the prices for this set of work boots or that set of work pants. And I remember standing next to my father, and the man would say to him, "Come on, don't Jew me down on this one, Jack. Come on, don't Jew me." But here's the thing that I didn't understand at the time. I was getting really angry, and my blood was boiling. And how come, looking at my father, are you going to put up with that? And my father said to me afterwards, "No, you have to let it go like water off a duck's back. This is just the culture. There's a certain amount of it." That guy,
he was stoic about it.
Very stoic, and it was just part of the vocabulary. Like, this is not like, God forbid, Nazi anti-Semitism. This is just like the general social level of intolerance that's normal. Like, the French and the English hated each other bitterly. The Jews, and there was one Chinese kid, and there was one black girl from Matheson. They were always the outsiders, but it was not such a huge deal. And when I go up there now, my mother's still living there, they're perfectly friendly. It's just
so what changed?
What change you mean in terms
They're
of
friendly
these kids?
toward Jews, you're saying now.
Well, they're friendly towards me because I'm a northerner, because they see me as part of Unzera, part of us. But they'll harbor anti-Semitic attitudes, and they don't think that it's anything wrong. They don't think it's just.
And
part
the
of
root of it is what? What is the root, or what are the roots of it?
I think there's many factors. I think the role of television today is especially important because the culture is definitely very anti-Israel. But back then in the 70s, I think it would be more the traditional religious attitudes towards Jews and cultural attitudes towards the outsiders. But I got more fascinating stuff moving forward. Let's move forward.
Yes.
So I came to Toronto, and I was always fascinated with Jewish identity, and I took a degree in Jewish philosophy at the University of Toronto because I was always trying to figure out what does it really mean to be Jewish. I was not observant at all, but after doing this degree in philosophy, I ended up really putting it to good use as a profession because I became a ski instructor. And I was teaching skiing full-time.
You got a bachelor's degree in philosophy?
Yes. And then I met my wife, who was also a ski instructor. And it was really my wife, Ilana, who dragged me, sometimes kicking and screaming, to Yiddishkeit. She was interested in Yiddishkeit. She was interested in, finding out more about Judaism and so on. And she would say, why don't we read this book? And why don't we go to... after we were married, she said to me, she kept on looking out the window at the, we lived not too far from the Bayit, a big shul in Toronto, and the Rav was Rabbi Baruch Taub, a personal mentor. And she saw all the young couples on Shabbos walking by with the baby strollers. This was before we had kids. And she says, what? As my grandmother would say in Yiddish, was tut man dort? What are they doing over there? She's so curious. How come they're all walking? So she insisted on going to the Orthodox synagogue. I didn't want to go there because there are only fanatics in the Orthodox synagogue. and one thing after another, I got more and more involved. I ended up going to yeshiva. I ended up learning at Or Sameach at a few different campuses and being just... I'm still on the journey. I'm having a fantastic time with it. I always discover new things about Judaism that I would never have imagined actually are in the Torah, but they're there, and it's constantly fresh for me.
Wonderful. And from your experience in your path, your trajectory, becoming more from, what thoughts, what suggestions do you have for somebody that's just starting out in terms of how to develop his or her Yiddishkeit and Frumkeit?
Well, that's a great question. And I get that question a lot, especially when I went on to teach in secular universities, and I had a lot of interactions with intelligent young Jewish people who wanted to explore their identities. And maybe we'll go back to some of those stories soon. I have some funny ones. But usually what I tell people are two things. I'm not a rabbi, and this is not necessarily rabbinically approved, so I hope that I won't say anything that's hashkafically wrong, but I usually tell people only to do things that are fun. Tell them that if they want to try something in Yiddishkeit, like kashrus, Shabbos, whatever, try it if it's fun. Don't try anything that is not fun. Because my experience has been that people who take on things that are not fun too
and
fast.
A lot.
Right. They just, it all goes out the window.
You can burn out and be resentful.
One step forward and 3 steps backward. So just do the things that are fun. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will figure out the cheshbon. God will figure out the calculations of where a person should be at a particular moment, but just pursue those things that you find enjoyable. And secondly, and we talked about this a little while ago, it's really kind of the same point stated a little differently. You have to grow the payas on the inside before you grow them on the outside.
Right.
You've got to have it coming out of you naturally before you adopt something. In fact, I can tell you one story about a person who... can I tell you a sad story in this context?
Sure.
Okay. I'm not going to reveal a person's name. I'll send them the link because now he's quite a famous individual. And but I'll tell him my take on the story. Anyways... a friend of mine I went to graduate school with, and one day I'm walking in the stacks in the library, and he was also like me, exploring Judaism, and I see him one day, and he's like transformed, I hadn't seen him in a few months. He had a big, heavy beard, and he was wearing a long capota and a kippah that went down to his eyebrows, huge, very super frum guy. And he was even kind of walking hunched over like you would imagine a ghetto Jew in Warsaw in 1920 or something. He's like, and I said to him, hey, what are you doing here? What's with all these clothes and everything? And he said, we got so interested in this movement and this Rebbe, and I'm so, my wife and I are just having such a great time. And then he said to me, listen, I have to ask you a question, because this will give you a sense of where he was in the Yiddishkeit. He asked me, he said, we live on the 7th floor of an apartment building, and my wife and I realized that, I hope you don't mind me saying this on the radio, but when we flush the toilet, somewhere in the building, a motor turns on to pump the water up to the top floor. And we said, how can we flush the toilet on Shabbos? So we decided that we would buy all these pails of water and keep them in the bathroom, so that any time on Shabbos that we need to flush the toilet, we just pour the water in, and that's it, right? And he says, do I really have to do this? Now, obviously, this is something, if he had gone to ask a Rav, he would get a very simple halachic answer. There's a lot to say about the halacha of grama, which allows the flushing of toilets, opening of refrigerator doors, things like that, not with the light bulb, but, different.
Right.
So I was able to explain it to him, but just see how extensive he went to this point. And on the outside, he's looking like the Chafetz Chaim, but at home, he doesn't know that he can flush the toilet. Then I saw him again about 6 months later, same place. He's wearing like a pair of shorts, like a loincloth almost, a tank top, no tzitzis, no black coat, no kippah, beard's gone, and the wedding ring is gone too. And I said to him, what happened? And he said, I went to take a shower, and I took off all my various appurtenances. I got into the water, and when I got out of the shower, I just could not bring myself to put any of them back on. And his marriage failed, and all kinds of other things went out the window at that time.
And wonder what was the tipping point for him?
Well, he may weigh in on this. I don't want to give you his name, as I said, but I consider him one of my personal minyan. That when Halavai, if I get to go to Shamayim, and I think I will, because I have some amazing Talmidim students, and there's no way that they would not let the Rebbe in if the Talmidim are getting in. That in Shamayim, he and I will be part of the same minyan, because I think that he and I have a lot in common. But at any rate, I think the tipping point was exactly this illustration of trying to do way too much too fast. It's such a big, bizarre, unusual religion with so many fascinating aspects to it, troubling aspects. I still find things that I say, wow, I can't believe this is actually part of the Torah, usually on a positive side, but sometimes troubling, and it can be too much, it can be overwhelming.
Gradual steps. I always heard rabbis telling me that gradual steps are very important.
We learn from the Torah about לעלות במדרגות, in the altar. When you go to the altar, you go במעלות, not in the madrigot, not in this. Don't even jump up. Go slowly, moderate, and do it at the right step by step. And I think that it's amazing that when you're speaking about jumping to the deep water, and people just suddenly discover a different world, and either they're scared back and just going out, and instead to go slowly. For me, it took me many years to put this beard and the Buddha kippah, and I think that my own reason for the poet, it's different. It's a personal reason, because I remember myself crossing the street of Mea Shearim, and I went to my university, and I see these people with the big beard, and I said, this is primitivist, that's people that don't know nothing, and just, I am the university graduate, and I'm one of the top, and I know everything. And then I realized that I don't know nothing. And that's when I look at the mirror, I said, Nissim, you try to be one of them now, that they know much better than, much better than. And this is all true about you, because if you know that, it's funny, because your wife Ilana, my wife Ilana, and my wife pushed me. It's
very funny.
It's really funny. Something that's very, okay, so but this is about your story, not my story. I just jump over. It's all the Jewish people, basically, even Pesach story. We are one. We are one, and we have to realize that these people that jump over and come, I believe that he will come back. I believe I'm 100%.
Before Moshiach, God willing.
No, he's already back. He's very successful, very active in the frum world. He's a personality.
Yes,
he became from again.
Yeah. He put his life back together.
So what brought him back?
I was also a woman. It was his second wife,
It's very important.
And sometimes it's the children. Sometimes it's the children.
We started with my children.
People.
I started with my children. God. Yeah, and my wife followed, but it's all everybody with us is on Ilana.
That's right. That's right. Maybe I can say something about the putting on the kippah, because that was a big change.
Yes,
when I was already working on my PhD, and I decided over, what I was doing is when I went to university, then I was the secular guy, just doing my studies, things like that. And then when I would go back to the neighborhood, Rabbi Taub's shul, then, I would put my kippah on, and then I was part of the neighborhood because it wasn't so frightening. It was, a little kind of shtetl neighborhood. But
in Toronto, right?
In Toronto, yeah. And over one December break, I decided, what is this? I'm comfortable walking around the streets of the Jewish neighborhood without a kippah. Why can't I wear my kippah on campus too? So I went back to school in January after the break and wearing my kippah. And my PhD supervisor pulls me aside and says, Henry, or actually he said to me, Mr. Abramson, would you like to go see the University Counseling Center? He was worried that I was something mentally ill because I was wearing the kippah. And, people got used to it. Look, the reality is...
Was that a less affiliated Jew?
No, he was not Jewish.
Oh, he was not Jewish.
But, he thought that the kippah was a sign of mental illness, that it was like I was unstable. So if that's the case, I've been unstable now for about 40 years, so I guess I probably...
My question to you, what do you feel that when, for example, now, still, when you go on driving car and you want to do something, and you say, "Well, I cannot do this. I cannot do this." You can, but look, Before, we started with. I started with the baseball cap.
Yeah.
Started with a baseball cap and no beard, nothing. And then slowly, and also the people around me just keep thinking, "Oh, he become fanatic. He become brainwashed." He was in a seminar. I'm telling you, even my close sibling, oh, I cannot go to him Shabbat because he cannot drive, all this stuff. It's really...
But you're right. The point is, when you put on that kippah, it's maybe something for you personally, but you have to realize that all of a sudden, everyone else is going to be making decisions about you as well. So, when occasionally, if I'm driving, let's say I don't check my blind spot and I pull over and I cut someone off and I hear the horn, and then they come coming up beside me and they look in to see what kind of person is driving, I always pull my kippah off, because I don't want them to see. I don't know if I can pull off the disguise, but
it's obligated. I feel very obligated.
Raised to a higher standard.
Yeah, very, very. That's unfortunately some people get used to this custom and behave like different creatures. Yeah. But this is not something that this is something that I found very difficult when I come to be Baal Teshuva. That we the Sephardi and the Siddur and in our Siddur in the morning we said before we starting Shacharit, הריני מקבל עליי מצוות עשה ואהבת לרעך כמוך.
Yeah, I do that also when putting on tefillin.
Yeah, so we have to say this obligation of this, and this is very tough, very tough.
Yeah. But it doesn't say for how long. I accept it right now when I'm putting on my tefillin. But I can let that go after a few minutes.
I think my biggest concern is to be melamed zchut Am Yisrael. I think it's very tough, very, very tough. As a Baal Teshuva, that we see so many crazy stuff that around us.
Wow. Mr. Charney and I were discussing this yesterday in the pre-interview. I think the hardest thing for me as a Baal Teshuva is when religious Jews let me down. Certainly when they're God forbid, in the newspaper or something like that with some kind of criminal act, that's for sure. But even small things, like if I'm walking down the street on Shabbos and I say good Shabbos to somebody, and they look at me like, "What planet did you come from?" Or
you're translucent. Yeah. I call it translucent. I'm not existing as a Shabbat Shalom.
Why not?
No.
Why not?
It's very important to be the fellow Yidden, be friendly to each other, whether they're from or not.
Not only this, even the Nochri, even the Gentile is obligation. It's obligation. I got a phone call because my show was on Sunday, and I spoke that we have to love all the people in the world, anyone. Muslim, Christian, everyone. This is our obligation. This Yitzir. I got a phone call from a lady, and she was, how you can say it? How you can? I said, listen, all of us is Yitzir Elohim. We have our obligation to be part of this universe. Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't create nothing wrong. Everything is good. You have to love them. You have to find them that maybe we'll change the world, and that's our obligation as a Jewish. But that's part of our people feeling, and I'm very upset, for example, to listen to kids in the schools that they're teaching them that, oh, don't look about this, And I got a phone call last night about again one kid, and my non-Jewish teacher. I said nothing to do with the religious of your teachers. What happened? It's to examine, but don't mention that the religion of the teacher doesn't matter if yeshiva or no yeshiva. We are one of a kind. We're human beings. That's each other is different. They have 7, so we have 613. We have to ask why we have 613.
We have different roles.
Yeah, exactly. The Prince of England, he cannot go on the street and go doing stupid things, because in a minute he will be on all over the sun and over the newspaper and everything, because he is the Prince of England. We are the Prince of this years. We Bnei Elokim, Bnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avinu Shebashamayim.
Right.
So we cannot go like this, do whatever you want. This is our duty. 613 is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us. There's a code that Israel give us a privilege. Over this, you tie the shoes, you have a mitzvah. You don't tell a dime, even the going to tell a dime after the bathroom, okay? So, but we have a bracha. We already privileged and other things. I'm sorry, I'm jumping over too much.
That's fine. I totally agree with that. And I wanted to also ask you, what are the aspects of Yiddishkeit that drew you to becoming more observant? And also, I wanted to ask you, it could be possibly one of these things, Maimonides on Teshuva, and your experience with Maimonides on Teshuva, your understanding of it.
Well, those are both excellent questions. To start with the first one, besides, maintaining positive relations with my wife, who was definitely taking the family in this direction, I had the privilege of having some brilliant instructors, people who exposed aspects of Yiddishkeit to me that were just transformational. In particular, I mentioned Rabbi Baruch Tau, but also Rabbi Uziel Milevsky Zatzal, who was a tremendous teacher at yeshiva. And I had the privilege at the same time, I thank God I was successful in my academic career, and I spent time at Harvard, where they published my book, and at Oxford, and at Cornell, and Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I saw, and I got to interact with top minds in my field in many of those great universities. But the level of sheer intellectual brain power concentrated inside a base medrash is absolutely amazing. And the sustained searing search for truth that happens when two people are in front of a Gemara just overwhelmed me. So it was the intellectual adventure of Judaism, I think, more than anything else. And the Cholent. Cholent was also very good. Cholent made a big difference. The Maimonides is a figure that I'm very drawn to in many ways. And as we were discussing earlier, back in 2012, I published a very small book, a personal book, not such a great contribution to the scholarly literature, but it was a commentary on Maimonides' laws of Teshuva, Hilchos Teshuva. Because Maimonides, as a rationalist and as a legalist, he took Teshuva, and he was really the first person to take this and codify it into laws. How is this done? Step by step. First this, then that.
And excuse me, we understand the word tshuva. It's most commonly associated with repentance, but it has other associations as well, right?
It can mean respond. It can mean retort. It can mean rebuke. You can and generally
Return.
Absolutely. Answer, absolutely.
My the tshuva, it's like, we know that Amalek, what Amalek took, it took the Vav and K, right? Missing also the part of the Kiseh, the Kes, right? Tshuva is the letters Tashiv Vav K. Bring the Vav K. And these are basically all our purpose, to bring back the full Shem Hashem.
So it's all about returning,
Yes,
in general, all about coming home, coming back to center. So I started a project back in 2012, which I've returned to every year, except for, unfortunately, a year after my father passed away. And I review it, and using the wonders of electronic publishing, I redo the commentary, because tshuva is a process that I don't think you get to an end point. You don't say, okay, now I'm done, right? I myself am working on the Ten Commandments. I'm almost there. But at some point, we want to get through all 613. We want to try and absorb them. So every year, I kind of go back to Hilchos Tshuva of Maimonides, and I formulate my thoughts, and I write down my meditations. It's not something necessarily for a great scholarly contribution, but it's my personal approach to tshuva, and I'm hoping that one day my kids will read it, that kind of thing.
But it's also interesting because I noticed that you link it to your path in Yiddishkeit. And I thought that was very interesting. Maybe you'd want to talk a little about that, how you link your understanding of Maimonides' tshuva and your path in Yiddishkeit.
Those who study Maimonides well know that he was a brilliant master of subtly deceptive prose. His language in the original Hebrew, it's really pretty basic Hebrew. It's like, 7th grade level Hebrew, very easy to apprehend. But when you really delve into the specific word choice and syntax and sequence, there's so much incredible weight that every single word, every single letter was measured out with tremendous precision. So the more you go into Maimonides, the more you really discover how much is happening in the background. And I think that's my own personal encounter with Judaism, is things that look superficial, things that look like they're historically predetermined. It turns out that they have actually a massive amount of inertia pushing them forward with a tremendous depth of spirituality.
It's true. I totally agree. Now, in terms of, you're also involved in chinuch. You're also involved in chinuch related to Judaism and Jewish history. Tell us a bit about how that evolved.
Oh, that will be a great pleasure.
Teaching about Judaism.
That's the main reason why I wanted to accept your invitation to speak, because I got to do a plug for my great college, Touro College, which is on 1602 Avenue J in Brooklyn. I want to make sure that was picked up by the microphone.
And that's where the class is, right?
Yeah, that's where my adult ed class is. But I'll take a little bit longer to answer this, because I'm very, very enthusiastic about the job that I recently was appointed to at Touro College.
You were in Florida before.
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, my graduate career was kind of like an amalgam of postdoctoral studies in Europe and the Soviet Union and Canada and the United States, and also at the same time yeshiva study. And I spent some time in Kollel, in Monsey, and in Jerusalem, of course, and also in Toronto. And both of these things kind of happened simultaneously. Then I ended up getting a regular tenure-track job at a state university in Florida, and I worked there for 9 years until Dr. Bernard Lander, Alav Shalom, a tremendous individual who was the founder of Touro College, wanted to start a campus in Miami. And he tapped me to be the founding dean of that campus, and that was a tremendous experience for me, because for the first time, I was able to take my bifurcated existence, which had kind of like the secular identity on one hand and the Jewish identity on the other, and bring them together. So when I was teaching in secular colleges, I always had to say things like, according to rabbinic tradition, the Israelites traversed the Sinai Desert at this point, and all of a sudden at Touro College, I could say when we left Mitzrayim. All of a sudden, it was first person plural. It was here I was talking to Jews about Jewish things, and I felt like it was a whole new level of exposure for learning, and I was really privileged to be part of it. I love teaching in the secular schools as well. I had some brilliant students. Maybe before I do more plugs of the college, I'll tell you one story as an example.
Sure.
Maybe you'll enjoy this one. So teaching at this school in Florida, I usually taught, Or Sameach used to call me the secret weapon because I would teach these Judaic studies courses and I would send about a dozen students every year to yeshiva in Israel. And I had this one course which was really Pirkei Avos, which I called Introduction to Rabbinic Thought, JSL 301 or whatever it was. And maybe I'll tell you two stories. The first story is I had this one woman in there, and she came to my office after a few months of class, and so she's sitting in my office with me, and she said, and she was interesting from an interesting family. She was one of 6 children, very unusual for a secular Jewish family, and her parents had 6 children because they Dafka wanted to have one child for each of the million killed in the Holocaust. So they're very dedicated,
powerful.
very very, very powerful Jews, but secular. Anyway, she says to me, Dr. Abramson, I've really been enjoying your classes, and I've been learning a lot. I'm very excited about Torah, and I've decided I really have to stop going out with my non-Jewish boyfriend. I'm going to end that relationship. So, okay. And she says, and I wonder if I can impose on you, Dr. Abramson, if it's not too much trouble, could you please show me how to write my Hebrew name? Right? So
beautiful.
Her name was Leah. I showed her on the computer. I printed it out in Rashi's script, the regular script. Told her who Leah was. We talked for a while. I'm thinking we'll have to invite her for Shabbos, So I said to her, "So why are you so interested in your Hebrew name?" She says to me, "I've decided I want to get a tattoo."
Oh boy.
So. Now, on the one hand, we ended up talking her out of that too. But
that's good.
But on the one hand, it was a beautiful moment because here is a woman who literally wants to put her Jewish identity on her body. She wants to say, "I am a Jew, and I'm proud of it, and I want to let the world know." In a way that, of course, I'll express my individuality like all my friends in the same way. But it was a beautiful thing. It was coming from a pure source. It was just kind of filtered through.
They go through different lighting. And let's say this, I saw unfortunately with many of people that I know that has tattoo it's unfortunate with a lot of Shema Yisrael. I don't know. Probably you saw it in the mikveh or something. And they know they regret, but even they cannot take it off.
Well, Rav Ovadia Yosef has an interesting psak on that, and I don't want to quote it on the air because I don't remember exactly how he says it, but I think there are heterim even for the shemos.
Shemos has to basically peel it off, and it's a big story, But it's something because a regular tattoo it's often a question because you're writing tattoo on tattoo over. But in Shem Hashem is much more painful.
More strictly. Let me tell you the second story, which is also, I think, a brilliant one. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm pretty sure I'll get into Shemayim. It's mainly because of students like this guy. So I think I can tell you his name because he's a big tzaddik now. His name is Alex Goldman. And he is a major therapist in Milwaukee now. He employs dozens of other therapists, and he works specifically with the frum population, other populations as well. He's a very, very brilliant guy. He works with things like internet addictions, and he has payas down to his knees. He's a real chassid.
I met him.
Oh, you met him, Alex Goldman? Oh,
I met him.
He's fantastic. So anyways, here's a story. You probably don't know this then, Rabbi. So it was the same class, and at the beginning of class, I walk in, and this is my first class teaching at this university. I'm going to make a big impact. I'm going to really do something great for the Ribbono Shel Olam, and I'm going to really do my best. Now I have my black hat on and things like that. I go into the classroom, and the first thing I do is I want to encourage the students to ask questions. So I write on the board in Hebrew, Lo habaishan lamed. The embarrassed cannot learn. And I'm waiting for the first student to ask me, Professor, what did you write on the board? No one says anything. It's the first class. No one says anything. So, Okay, I write it again. And then I wrote it another time, and I underlined it, and then I wrote it really big with circles, and I'm going through the whole class, writing it over and over again. The whole board is filled with that phrase, Lo habaishan lameid. No one's asking me, why are you doing that? And I'm thinking, I'm so depressed. I'm saying, this is not going to work. They think I'm a lunatic writing this phrase on the board. And at the end of the class, I dismissed the class, and they're all filing out. Guy walks up to me. He's got sunglasses perched on the top of his head, and a Florida guy, and a tank top and flip-flops and things like that. And he says to me, "Excuse me, Professor, well, what were you writing on the board?" And that guy now is an incredibly inspirational Jew, a tremendous model of Yiddishkeit, because he was the only one who had the courage to ask the crazy professor, "What does that mean? Lo habaishan lameid." So I have experiences like that completely inform my approach to teaching Torah. And let me go straight to Touro College once again, 1602 Avenue J. I worked for Dr. Lander in Florida for 6 years, and had a tremendous experience there. Really enjoyed it. And then they gave me a promotion to serve as dean in the Brooklyn campus, which is a big change for me. Baruch Hashem, I get to mentor under the executive dean, Dean Robert Goldschmidt, who is a fixture of Brooklyn, who has given his entire life and his mahus over to the building of the college in this neighborhood and worldwide, really, because Touro College, of course, has campuses all over the world, 18,000 students. It's really quite an achievement. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to interact with so many more students and have really a national platform for my exploration of Judaism in this particular environment. And I'm really delighted to be in that position.
So how did you develop this class, and what are you teaching, and what are your students learning, and you're learning as well as they are, in terms of Judaism, in terms of Jewish history?
Well, I've got, mainly my job is administrative now, where I try and keep tabs on what we're teaching in the college as a whole. And of course we have 25 majors in many different fields. Judaic studies is one of them, but most of our students in Avenue J have already spent many years in yeshiva or seminary, and they're coming to study psychology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, physician assistant programs. They want to get into medical school, law school, but they all have a strong interest in ongoing Jewish studies. So I have really 4 classes that I'm putting a lot of energy into. Well, let's say 3. 2 of them are in Jewish history, so I offer them online primarily because I have a much larger reach online. And they're very heavy on video content, where I give lectures with artwork and things like that. And I put a lot of the lectures on YouTube, where they have about 28,000 visits a month. It's a really, I think Kanena are a popular site. About 152 countries are represented, and Touro College is really the center of it all. The other class that I think you're referring to is the adult education class, which I offer on Monday nights. Mm-hmm. We happen to be on hiatus right now because of Passover, but it's just a popular biography series where I pick individuals in Jewish history, and we spend an hour talking about their life and work. We just and they tend to be, I think, more or less well-known figures, but very important nevertheless. Last week we discussed, for example, Rabbi David Zinsheim, who was a very important figure in turn of the 18th century France.
I was reading about that.
Oh, great.
What you had for the class, and it's fascinating.
Oh, I think so. He had a major impact on modern Jewish history. He was appointed by Napoleon to be the head of the Grand Sanhedrin that Napoleon had put together that would answer questions once and for all whether or not Jews are allowed to live in various countries in Europe, and under what circumstances.
And this was Napoleon the First?
Yeah, this is the Napoleon.
Wow.
A lot of Jews actually called him Chelek Tov.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bonaparte, the good portion, because they thought that he was changing Jewish life so much. It didn't turn out that way in the end, but nevertheless. So those classes are very popular, but they're directed not so much as conventional undergraduate students as they are to the larger population of Brooklyn as a whole.
Did you found something that like a resentment about the Jewish philosophy? I tell you, the funny story about when I was in Israel, that a professor wanted to do a course about Pirkei Avot, and nobody registered Pirkei Avot, So
at a secular university in Israel.
So what he did, he changed the name. He said old Chinese philosophy. And he changed the name of rabbis to Ching Chang Chong and all this stuff, and he started teaching them. In the first few sessions, he spoke instead Rabbi Yehuda, he just said Ching Chong, you're confused, all this, and it was packed full of
back to the rafters.
It's amazing, and it's really something that I know is Israeli. I know the residentials of the anti kind of religious. Here, it's somehow different, but in Israel, in our life, Dros Dados, all this kind of stuff, you are the primitive and stuff like this. Yeah. And it's amazing show that the Israeli, I know that I myself was in the, all this guru and all this other stuff.
You experimented with other philosophies.
Yeah, because the neshama, the Jewish neshama is seeking for truth, seeking for something emet. And then, and you reach a point that this is baloney and this is baloney, and that's something that's like I'm born Jewish. What can I do? That was my philosophy. And then I found that through my kids, through that learning, and I don't know nothing. I really know nothing about what is real to be a Jewish, and that's gradually understand. Slowly. And this is the thing that I would say that Baruch Hashem, we have the spark in between us that we're looking for, and that's why you find all over the world the Jewish that always looking, wandering, in China, in Timbuktu, all these places, just Jewish come look around.
They're scattered across the four winds after we lost the second Beis Hamikdash. What I'm curious about, some of the students in your classes, have you ever had students who were, let's say, they could be from birth, they could be short-term Baal Tshuva, mid-term Baal Tshuva, long-term Baal Tshuva, that had questions, concerns about Yiddishkeit, and you help them to, look into it and try to understand it better so they could feel that they understood it and feel more at peace with it, to understand it and appreciate it better.
I think that's really the whole essence of teaching, is to help students assimilate the information. And so if I wasn't doing that, I wouldn't deserve this job at Touro College, because that's the whole point of it. What I think, though, if I may, what's more profound about your question is how many times have my students taught me how to understand Yiddishkeit.
That's also very good, and very important.
Oh my gosh, that's happened so many times. We have a passage in the Talmud. Rabbi Chanina says that, I learned a lot from my teachers. I learned even more from my colleagues, but from my students most of all. There's no question that my students are my greatest teachers, and I have learned so much Musar from them, so much about the proper conduct as a Jew. Even if they're not observant, sometimes I see them and I say, wow, how am I going to get to that level of behavior and that level of bitachon, of trust in God, from a very simple level. I've also had some kind of wacky experiences too. Like I remember, I have to clean up my stories a little bit. Well, I have the 3 stories jump into my head, and none of them I'm really comfortable with on the radio. But I think I'll tell you one. So anyways, I've discussed with one of my students who was recently married. I discussed with him, in class, we talked about the ritual of bris milah, talked about the various things that go into circumcision and things like that. And I talked about the concept that the foreskin that's removed, the orla, is a representation of the Yetzer Hara. And you're supposed to bury it. The halacha is that the moel, you don't really see this at most bar mitzvahs, but they don't throw it in the garbage, The moel will then take it, and later he will bury it somewhere, It's supposed to So anyways, this student, he was married, gets married, and then, a little while later they have a baby, and I go to the bris, and it's a very nice bris, and things like that. And then during the party afterwards, where we're having bagels and things like that, he comes over and says, Dr. Abramson, Thank you. So much of your teaching made a big impact on me, and we really made a lot of decisions about how we wanted to do this Brit Milah. But I just got to ask you, what do I do with this? He took his hand out of his pocket and he had the orla with him. And I was like, oh, he beats me.
So you have to bury it.
So we went outside. He got a shovel. We buried it together. It was just.
But the mother is normally doing it. No, I can.
I don't know what I'm going to do.
I
This is, this is the wacky
That's a
world.
very unusual experience.
I have weirder stories than that one, but I don't want to tell them on the radio.
Okay.
But, even at Touro College, where I have students with strong from backgrounds, many generations from, we're all on a journey, and we're all trying to figure out exactly how we relate to Judaism, and they're exploring too. And in fact, I would like to tender for discussion that in many ways they're at a disadvantage, because they have a certain amount of ideology and behaviors and things like that that's indoctrinated into them, and so they have the advantage of it being mushrash, like it's in their
Sometimes
roots.
they can feel it's by rote. That could be a nisayon.
Right.
That could be a challenge for them, right?
They can think
to
sometimes
get a freshness and a passion about
they don't
Yiddishkeit,
own it
right?
themselves. I know that every single thing that I do, poorly or otherwise, but whatever I do, I know I've thought about it and I've taken it on, and I own it. But they've kind of like been given this Yerusha, and God forbid, sometimes they can regard it as something that is dumped on them and say, well, I didn't ask for this. It's actually like the famous Gemara in Shabbos. I think it's what Tes-Ches, or Tzadi-Ches, if I remember correctly, or Pei-Ches, that Hashem holds the Mount Sinai over the heads of the Jews and says, here's the Torah, here's your choice, you accept it, fine,
right.
And if not, this is going to be your grave. And Tosfos says there, wow, this is a big defect in the arrangement, because how can we say that we accepted this willingness? We can say we were under duress.
We did it on Purim, though, fully.
Okay, that's
of our
okay.
own
That's
will.
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So we redid it again. That corrects that Tosfos. Well, it's a learned audience, but but nevertheless, I think that a lot of the students at Touro sometimes are at a disadvantage because they have not had the same kind of opportunities as a Baal Teshuva to own every mitzvah.
But sometimes I've experienced, hosts, for a Shabbos Suda, saying that, interacting with Baalei Teshuva helps them to re-energize their Yiddishkeit. It's very gratifying because you hear stories, they're going to think this of you, think that of you, like looking in a condescending way. But I have experienced very little of that. I know that there are people that have experienced that, and Nisim and I have talked about how ultimately you develop your emunah, your bitachon, your faith, your trust in Hashem, and your Yiddishkeit and doing the Torah mitzvahs because of your individual relationship with Hashem, with God, and building and developing that. But when you're beginning the process, I think that is more challenging than if you're further down the road, maybe.
I wish I could agree with you. My father, Olav Hashem, once said to me, I asked him, when my wife was having our first child, I said, so Dad, are you ready to be a Zaidi? And he said, Henry, I'm not ready to be a father. And sometimes I feel like that. Things like bitachon, it's so huge and so difficult. And, every tiny little bit of progress that I think I personally make, I see just how much more there is to accomplish. And I don't think it becomes easier. I think it becomes harder.
Harder?
Yeah.
I think I'm really fully understand you, and because our Chacham said Kol Gadol, it's
Yisrael Gadol Himenu.
And this is no question, because when you're studying that, and beside it, what we have now in our box here, the hard drive, all the storage that we have before, it's very it's very difficult to erase it. Very difficult to erase it, and it's jumping from in the middle of that tefillah sometimes, in the middle of this, and this is where we standing up. I'm jealous in one time, and in my kids that are much more cleaner. On the other hand, I see that they grow into it. They accept it. When you go to a shul, it's like it's their natural stuff, and I see it. I'm painful on this. I tell you, I'm trying to give them slowly to feel it. more sense of the but in the yeshiva and all this that okay that's and then that place
More sense of what?
the holiness, the acceptance. Shiviti Hashem lenigdi tamid. This is the key point. That when we see the Shem Hashem in front of our eyes and in us, inside our house, inside our children, everything, and this to plant it inside. That's all about the radio station here.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
I was by the way, I wanted to clarify.
I just wanted to comment on one thing. One thing, Rabbi, to relate to what you're saying, it's a little bit like tefillah, like davening, right? Like, I remember when I was just starting out, and I felt terrible because it took me so long to bench. It took me so long to say Birkat Hamazon. Everybody else is already finishing, and they're looking at me, or they're walking away, and Shmona Esrei, it took forever, and things like that. But my tefillos, when I daven like that, and I was like aching over every syllable.
You were krachzing.
Yeah, and I was like, and I wasn't clear on what I was saying, or what I meant. That was real avoda. Now I can daven by heart, and I can also do my taxes at the same time, and I can drive the car, and I'm doing it's because and that's the disadvantage.
Well, that is a challenge, and I wasn't saying that it's really challenge.
This is really challenging because I know myself that I'm holding myself, and I know Nefesh HaChaim talking about tefillah and all the other books. So that's really amazing. I give you practical ideas about how to pray, and for me at tefillah, I still pray slowly. I still pray slowly. My Birkat Hamazon slowly. That Shmona says slowly. I'm trying to keep it. It's very, very strong. And it's very tough, but it's just part of our Nisyon.
I was thinking, no, it's fine.
Right over
no,
there.
fine. So I was just saying it's not easy street. I'm just was talking about the concept that you can start taking little pieces and slowly develop some aspects, a little bit of Emunah and Bitachon. There is a challenge, though, like, for instance, when you say the Shmona Esrei faster, to keep the Emunah and Bitachon, the faith and trust, and the Kavana all together and keep the concentration. That is a challenge, because the faster you say it, then that can become more of a challenge. That's true.
I think, but we can, we shouldn't end on a down note. I read a story once in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. I'm not sure I'm getting the story exactly right, but perhaps some of the listeners will correct me. When he was, on his deathbed, his Hasidim said to him, Rebbe, who's going to succeed you? How will we find the person who's going to be the next Rebbe for us? And he said to them, if a man comes to you and tells you he knows the secret to concentration in prayer, they say, yeah. He says, that's not the guy. Because this is really a very challenging thing, and that's the avoda.
You can practice it a little by little. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Dean Abramson from Touro College, and I want to thank everybody for listening and also watching this show with Pesach Charney here on the Baal Tshuva show, and with Nisim Lazari. Thank you so much for your insights and your wonderful work. Keep it up. Now, just say to the audience, what is the best way for them to reach you if they wanted to contact you?
Well, I work weekdays at the mighty Avenue J campus of Touro College. Electronically, you can reach me at abramson@touro.edu.
And that's spelled how?
Abramson @touro.edu. I have a website that's henryabramson.com. That Henry, does it have a period in it? I forgot now. No, I don't think there's a period. henryabramson.com. That has a lot of the videos up there.
Right. And, fascinating. It's fascinating. Keep up the wonderful work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Abramson. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And all the best. Be well. Have a good week.